Hello. I'd like to talk to you about a very important thing that happened recently. People in California have been talking about how California has been like a nation for years, many years. Other people talked about how wouldn't it be cool if California is a nation. But we've never actually had people talk about California could survive as a nation independent from the federal government and be dead serious about it. That's happened very recently. In the last couple weeks, Governor Newsom talking about the word nation state has made it where anyone can talk about nation state and it's normal. But there's something very special that happened today that I say is a difference in history of where we're going to be going in the future with California. Dan Walters wrote an article in CalMatters today called, let me get the official title, Could California Really Go It Alone? Dan Walters in CalMatters at 12 o'clock this afternoon on May 7th, 2020. Could California really go it alone? Dan Walters is a very famous policy analyst. A lot of people don't like what he says. A lot of people do. But everybody knows him. If you're a politician, a newscaster, a professor, if you study government, you know who this guy is. Serious policy analyst. CalMatters is one of the top policy journals in California. So top policy person says in top policy journal, folks, we might actually really need to look into secession now. That happened very recently, weeks after Governor Newsom made it normal and reasonable to think about California as a nation state. So when Dan Walters says we need to really think about this, that means that it's now reasonable to say that reasonable people in policy circles in Sacramento, throughout California, can talk about maybe we really should be ready to be a nation. Now, he didn't say it was a great idea and perfect. He said it had some problems. He said it might be able to work off, but he said you need to look into it. That's never happened before. I've been at this for years. No one has ever, in a position of authority, said, let's seriously look into this. So today is a new day. But there was a lot of people that got us to that point, and I want to mention a couple of them. So, here's a quick history of famous Californians talking about how California is more like a nation or should be independent that led up to Dan Walters doing what he did recently. 1550 to 76, the Spanish considered California an island. In the 1900s, Teddy Roosevelt called California west of the West, meaning weirdo state and not just different and Western, like something really different going on in California. In the 1960s, Governor Pratt Brown said California is part and a part from America, from the larger American society. In May 2002, also in January 1966, so in the 60s, you have Governor Pat Brown and Governor Ronald Reagan, very different political ideologies. Pat Brown says California is a part and apart from American society. Governor Reagan says California has, in January 1966, California has been described more like a nation than a state. Both of them said it mid-1960s. May 2002, not a lot happens for a long time. May 2002, George W. Bush has a lot of protests from here. He doesn't like that. And ABC TV reports in May 2002, to their astonishment, that the federal government seems to view California as, quotes, a foreign territory. Now, that's a key date because that's the first time anyone in the news has said that people actually view California as foreign. And that was kind of shocking. So that was 18 years ago. In November 2002, comedian Will Durst wrote an article suggesting California secede. Now, he was a comedian, but he was also friends with Willie Brown. That name's going to come into play very soon. Very soon. Watch. In November 2004, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Pat Morrison wrote an article in the LA Times where she suggested that California secede. That article was If at First You Don't Secede. November 2004, Pat Morrison. Now, January 2005, one of my personal heroes, Jeff Morissette. Jeff Morissette was the campaign chair for MoveOn.org. Yes, that MoveOn.org. And he ran all of the California chapter for MoveOn.org. By the way, California was a big part of how MoveOn got started. So the guy that ran California for MoveOn, January 2005, said he wanted to create a committee to explore secession. He was fired by MoveOn and he disappeared completely. July 2006, Arnold Schwarzenegger calls California a nation state. That's July 2006. Now, to my knowledge, Schwarzenegger was the first governor to call California a nation state. In August 2008, UCLA Law School has a report out called Like a Nation State. That's the UCLA Law School in August 2008 talking about how California seems to be more like a nation than just an American part of America. February 2009. This is the man that inspired me to get started with CalExit. Abraham Lowenthal is a professor at Long Beach State University, and he wrote a book called Global California Rising to the Cosmopolitan Challenge, where he said that California basically was already seen as a foreign nation by many countries, and that it was just losing being part of the American brand image. That put the idea in my head that California could actually survive as a foreign nation. August 2009, Shadowrun video game introduces the name, the idea of California as a nation state. Yes, it's a video game, but it was a major piece of culture. Video game talking about California as a separate nation. April 2010. Now this is interesting. Joe Matthews is a well-known reporter in California. He has a think tank, Zocalo Public Square. That's Zocalo Public Square by Joe Matthews. Could California be its own country? April 2010. That was the first serious discussion about if California could be a nation. September 2010. Civilization 5 comes out, a video game that talks about California as a nation. October 2010. Fallout Las Vegas, same thing. September 2011. The Legislative Analyst Office, LAO, does their first review of California as a donor state and how much money it loses being part of America. That's never happened before. California was a donor state since the early 80s. Decades go by. First time, September 2011, Legislative Analyst Office completes a report overview of federal funding saying, wow, we're getting abused financially being part of America. February 2012, Professor Richard Green of USC says that California should look into secession. Richard Green, professor, USC, February 2012. October 2012, Professor Chris Habels-Gray from UC Santa Barbara also talks about California seceding. November 2012, 13,000 Californians signed a petition to secede. Now, you may remember this because in November 2012, there were many states saying they wanted to secede. That was a reaction to Obama was African American, and many states were racist in America. So when you look at those petitions, the news reported a lot of these petitions were by racists who just hated African Americans. Now, in California, the news didn't really report on it because when you look at the petitions that were going around at this time, they were all white people. When you look at the petition that 13,000 Californians signed in November 2012, no one talked about Obama, and it was mostly Latinos. So the news couldn't paint that Californians are racist thing. It was something else. So they just dropped reporting on it. But 13,000 Californians said, sure. And they weren't talking about how they hate Obama. They just thought it would be neat. So, January 2013, Tom Elias writes, Tom Elias is a well-known columnist in California. He writes the first serious article talking about if California could survive as a nation, called How Would California Do on Its Own? So he's a well-known, respected columnist. He got the Governor Newsom removed, which allowed for the election of Governor Schwarzenegger, so he knows policy circles, and here he is suggesting maybe this is something to look into. Kind of stuck his neck out. October 2013, Governor Brown says he will not sign the National Security Agency's NDAA. So basically the federal government has this ability where they can kidnap citizens and deny you your rights and take you to a foreign country where you're beaten or murdered. Governor Brown said he wasn't going to reauthorize that. So this is the California government telling the federal government, I don't care what your military industrial agency says, I'm not doing it, directly defying federal authority. And he did it, and it passed. October 2013, Andy Cohen, a reporter at San Diego newspapers, suggested California may need to break off from America. February 2014, Michelle Richmond, an author, talks about how California could survive as a separate nation in her fictional book, Golden State. That also won a lot of awards and did well. March 2014, USC has a report called Vital Partnership by Annenberg Trust. That's the University of Southern California writing a report talking about how California acts more like a nation. That's the second academic report talking about how California acts more like a nation, March 2014. September 2014, California says it's going to give out driver's license to people who are not American citizens, directly defying everyone in America and federal authority. February 2015, UC Students Board agrees to divest from America. So the UC Students Board said they wanted to divest from financially supporting America. That was years ago, people. Years. 5 years ago. February 2015, Nora Campos, who is a high-ranking politician, suggested an embassy for California, as if it was foreign, in Washington, D.C., February 2015. Now, March 2015, Governor Brown is in a meeting with China on climate change, and he says to the Chinese government to consider California as a separate nation. We reported on that. Newspapers said we were lying because we said Brown went to China to say California is a separate nation when Brown was in California and speaking to Chinese government high-ranking officials and said, consider California as a separate nation. The news made it seem like we were blowing things out of proportion, but that was the first time that a California high-ranking official said anything like to a foreign government, consider us like a foreign nation. Never happened before. Big time. First people to point that out, right here. First. So, October 2015, Hillary Clinton is campaigning and says a state as big as many countries in the world. She talks about how California is more like a nation and just a part of America. Hillary Clinton, October 2015. January 2016, the LA Times runs a full-page article about California's secession. November 2016, Kevin De Leon, the third highest ranking politician in California, calls America a foreign land. That's November 2016, Kevin De Leon, foreign land. Evan Lowe, another California Assembly member, at the same time, November 2016, says he will explore the introduction of a bill to have California leave America. Joking, not joking. November 2016, Perez Hilton, many famous people, and billionaire Shervin Pishvar say that they would back CalExit. Full-blown secession. A lot of famous people, November 2016, were coming out for it. January 2017, Willie Brown goes on CBS TV and says California could cut off the federal government from money. January 2017, Willie Brown, the famous Willie Brown politician who ran the California government and knows everybody and started Governor Newsom's career and Kamala Harris's career and just about everybody and knows everyone, went on CBS TV and said, hey, we could cut the federal government off from federal money. February 2018, Willie Brown goes on that same channel, CBS, San Francisco, CBS, February 2018, and says California could secede. California really is capable of being an independent nation. Willie Brown, first to say that like that. August 13th, 2019, Professor Allison Holmes has a report on California as a nation state, looking at it. That's the third academic report looking into how California operates more like a nation by Humboldt. February 12, 2020, Mark Joseph, well-known famous person, writes an article in Newsweek magazine talking about California's secession, February 12, 2020. And now we have May 5th, 2020 by Dan Walters talking about in CalMatters, maybe California should secede and think about going alone. I'll read that article real quick. Gavin Newsom isn't the first governor to describe California as a nation state, but he has been the term's most vociferous gubernatorial exponent. What does it mean? Newsom offered this explanation in a recent interview with the Atlantic magazine. Look, we're the fifth largest economy in the world, 40 million strong. We're as diverse as a state as exists in this country, 20-some% of the state foreign born. He continued, this narrative of punching above our weight, this narrative around being a nation state, that narrative is a big part of the California spirit of being dreamers. This entrepreneurialism that the future happens here first, there's a pride in that. There's perhaps an arrogance at times. With its population and its geographic, cultural, and economic diversity, California does indeed have many of the characteristics of a nation. And its governors have at times sought their own connections with foreign nations, whether or not they comported at the moment with Washington's policies. Newsom's predecessor, Jerry Brown, was easily the most active governor in forging what amounted to a separate international relations policy. Spectacularly symbolized by participating as a de facto head of state in global conferences on climate change. The separateness on head of state in global conferences on climate change. The separateness of California from the federal government obviously widened when Donald Trump became president, especially during the first 2 years of his presidency, when Republicans also controlled both houses of Congress. But it's always been there regardless of the White House's occupant. It raises not for the first time the question of whether California could or even should go it alone, evolving from a nation state into an independent nation, or more accurately, returning to its brief pre-statehood bear flag republic days. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of people, famous Californians, leading up to this point, and we're there. You can have a real discussion about should we be a nation and be taken seriously. That's never happened before. I hope you have a little bit of understanding about how we got there. Thank you, and good night.